A black woman stands at the airport gate, calm, poised, ready to board. But just minutes later, she's publicly humiliated, pulled off the plane by force, and what no one knows is, she's a top-tier Homeland Security agent. What happened next left the entire flight in stunned silence. A black woman just wanted to board a plane. Just a plane. Just a flight. Just another Tuesday. But when she stepped into that airport, everything began to shift. The sound came first. The old speaker system crackled with routine announcements, a kind of background static to America's daily comings and goings. The voice of a young woman, professional and impersonal, called out boarding orders like a mechanical prayer. Flight 472 to Chicago. Now boarding zones 1 and 2. Nobody noticed the woman standing near the counter, not yet. She stood tall, calm, carrying herself with a grace too poised to be accidental. Her navy blue pantsuit was clean, her white blouse crisp, her shoes modest. She looked prepared. But not just for a flight. No, not quite. She was prepared for something more ancient than TSA, more persistent than a delayed departure. Her name was Naomi Johnson. And though nobody around her knew it, she worked for the Department of Homeland Security. She wasn't a passenger. She was a mission in motion. Now, I do not tell you this to add drama. I tell you because too many Americans still believe that racism arrives with fanfare, burning crosses, slurs shouted from pickup trucks, the dramatic. But racism rarely wears its Sunday best. No, it arrives in a look. In the pause that stretches one beat too long. In the way someone's tone changes, not loud, but sharp, dry, brittle with something they won't name. It arrives at the airport gate, where stories of power are told in whispers and tickets become weapons. Naomi approached the desk with the professionalism of someone used to playing invisible. She slid her boarding pass forward with a practiced smile, gentle but firm. The agent, Jill was her name, barely looked up. Then she did. And that look, that pause, a man might have missed it. A white man, especially, might have seen nothing at all. But Naomi had learned to read these moments, not just because she was black, but because she had been black in America long enough to know that sometimes the system doesn't have to say no. It only has to say, I don't see your name here. And so began the descent. Did you book through a third-party site? Jill asked, already typing. No, Naomi replied, calm. Directly. Here's the confirmation number. Another pause. Another flicker in Jill's expression. The kind of doubt that wasn't about the system, it was about the person in front of her. Still not seeing it, Jill said. Now, Naomi had seen this dance before. A mistake can always be fixed. A glitch is forgivable. But willful indifference is different. It carries a scent. You know it when it's there. Behind her, the line was building. People shifting, sighing, already impatient with the moment. They didn't see a DHS agent being stonewalled. They just saw a black woman holding up the line. So Naomi smiled again. The kind of smile that says, I've been here before and I know how to make it easier for both of us. Can I speak to a supervisor? Jill's mouth twitched. Fine, she said. Now pause. Consider this, reader. This is a woman with federal clearance, with classified briefings tucked away behind her calm exterior. A woman trusted to trail international criminals. And yet, here she is, having to ask for the right to fly. Let that sink in. She protects the very nation that questions whether she belongs in row 14C. And perhaps you wonder, why make this about race? Maybe Jill really saw a mismatch in the system. Maybe she was just having a bad day. But that, dear reader, is the trap of everyday racism. It hides behind politeness, behind policies, behind just doing my job. It doesn't need to shout. It whispers. And those whispers have been shaping Black lives since before airports existed. So when the supervisor arrived, a tall man named Stephen, he did what Jill wouldn't. He listened. He saw her paperwork, her ID, the confirmation number. It's here, he said. There's a flag on the reservation, but your documentation is valid. I'll override it. Naomi thanked him. And Jill? She didn't argue. She simply looked away, her authority revoked, but not her resentment. Naomi took her boarding pass quietly and moved toward the security line. But even as she walked, she noticed Jill reach for her phone. The war wasn't over. It had just changed fronts. And here, my older friends, is where I ask you. How many times have you seen a woman like Naomi, standing alone, being doubted for who she is, not because of what she's done, but because of what she looks like? How many times have we watched the machinery of systems spin, just fast enough to crush dignity, but not fast enough to leave fingerprints? This is not just Naomi's story. It is America's. And we are only beginning. Naomi walked away from the gate with her boarding pass in hand. To any outsider, it would seem the matter had been resolved. An error fixed. A name restored. A woman allowed to fly. But those of us who have lived long enough in America know better. We know that the battle never ends at the first door. There's always a second. Sometimes a third. And always the same question. Do you belong? Do you really belong? She entered the TSA line with her usual precision, removing her shoes, her laptop, her liquids, all with the well-rehearsed grace of a woman who had passed through hundreds of airports and knew how to move through American systems without raising alarms. But the thing is, when you're black, female, and unassuming, you don't have to raise alarms for the alarms to find you. She walked through the scanner. No beeps. No alerts. But as she reached for her bag, a voice called out, "Ma'am, step to the side, please." She turned. It was Officer Bryant, tall, stone-faced, with that particular kind of gaze that watches you too closely and not at all. "Just a quick check of your carry-on," he said. Naomi smiled faintly. "Of course." He opened her bag, more aggressively than needed. Hands moving too fast, too rough, like he expected to find something dangerous or wanted to. He pulled out her lotion, frowned at her toothbrush, prodded the compartments, eyes narrowing. And for a moment, Naomi held her breath. Because buried in the lining, beneath a false bottom, was her badge. Not her driver's license. Not her alias ID. But the real one. The one that could blow the whole operation. The one that could undo months of planning with a single word. But Officer Bryant didn't find it. He zipped the bag up, nodded like he'd done a good day's work. "You're clear," he said. But his tone, the way he said it, was the second door. The kind of tone that doesn't say, "You're free to go. But you're lucky I let you. Now tell me, what exactly did Naomi do wrong? Was it her perfectly legal lotion? Her boarding pass? Her stillness? Or was it the same thing it always is? Her presence. Not what she carried, but what she represented. A black woman moving through a whitewashed system with confidence. And for some people, that alone is enough of a threat. Naomi moved on, sat at her gate, tried to breathe. She reviewed her mission. Suspect, Silver Hawk. Target, a man suspected of forging thousands of identities, stealing names, lives, faces. The irony did not escape her. How often had her identity been stolen, not by hackers, but by stares, by silence, by suspicion? 30 minutes to boarding. She walked to the nearby deli, ordered a sandwich, ate slowly. A few travelers recognized her, not as an agent, not even as Naomi. Just a woman alone, maybe a little too put together, maybe someone to keep an eye on. She felt their glances like static in the air. And somewhere behind it all, like a shadow, Jill. The same gate agent, now whispering something to another employee near a break room. Why was she still hovering? Why hadn't she moved on? Was it just pride? Was it resentment? Or had she decided, quietly, to make sure this black woman did not fly without being reminded of her place? Naomi's phone buzzed. A message from her DHS contact. Target confirmed on manifest. Proceed with caution. She tucked her phone away. The mission had begun. But the real mission, The one not in her briefing packet was older. It was the mission every Black woman inherits the moment she's born. To navigate spaces that question her. To smile when being watched. To carry strength without making anyone afraid of it. Now, let me say this to you, my elders. You who remember segregated lunch counters. You who saw the fire hoses on the evening news. You who heard Dr. King's voice echo through black and white TVs. You may think we've come far. You may think things like this don't happen anymore. But I tell you now, they happen. Only now they wear better clothes. They carry clipboards instead of batons. They hide behind systems instead of slurs. But make no mistake, they are the same beast. They just smile when they bite now. Naomi sat at the gate. She looked out the window at the plane. She looked at her hands, strong, still, brown. Stay focused, she whispered to herself. Because the real test was still ahead. And if the first door had been denial, and the second door had been doubt, then the third was already opening. And waiting on the other side was a woman named Jill. And a mission that could explode at 30,000 feet. It began with a calm voice over the PA system. Now boarding Group 2 for Flight 472 to Chicago. Naomi stood. She adjusted the strap on her carry-on. Smoothed her blouse. Her hands moved the way they always did when she was about to enter a space where she'd be seen, scrutinized, sorted. Because flying, for a Black woman, is never just transportation. It is theater. And you, whether you like it or not, are always on stage. She stepped forward, boarding pass in hand. The gate agent, a different one this time, scanned it without incident. Have a good flight. 3 words. Simple. Civil. And yet, they felt like an oasis. She nodded, stepped onto the jet bridge, and exhaled. Just for a moment. Inside the plane, she found her seat. 14C. Aisle. Strategic. She stowed her bag overhead, sat down, and did what she always did in the first 5 minutes of every mission. She studied. Not the suspect, not yet. But the people, the rhythms, the patterns, the way a teenager clutched her stuffed giraffe, the way a businessman scrolled mindlessly through emails, the way America hums, unaware of itself. She let herself breathe. That was her first mistake. Because as she glanced up, just past the curtain that separated the coach from first class, she saw a familiar face. Jill. Yes, Jill, the gate agent from earlier. Now inside the plane. Now speaking urgently to someone in a Global Skies uniform. Naomi's breath caught in her throat. This wasn't protocol. Gate agents don't board planes unless something is wrong. Something was wrong. And then it happened. A tall man, broad shoulders, polished badge, face carved from protocol, approached her row. Miss Johnson. Her pulse quickened. But her face remained still. Yes. I'm afraid there's been an issue with your ticket, he said. We'll need you to step off the plane to verify some information. The hum of the cabin dimmed. Passengers turned their heads like sunflowers to the sun. But the sun was not warm. It was an accusation, cloaked in procedure. Let's stop here for a moment. I want to ask you, the reader, perhaps born before Jim Crow's curtain even began to fall. What does a Black woman do when she's told, in front of a plane full of strangers, that her right to sit, to exist, to be, must be reviewed? What does she do when the nation she serves asks her to stand and prove that she is not a threat? Naomi stood, slowly, carefully, as if her very movement could be misunderstood. Because it could. I already cleared this with your supervisor, she said calmly. I have the boarding pass. But policy had already turned into performance. The man said nothing more. He just gestures. And Naomi walked, past the rows of passengers who wouldn't meet her eyes. Past the ones who did, with suspicion, with pity, with nothing at all. Past the truth of her own quiet fury. On the jet bridge, the door hissed closed behind her. It sounded, to her, like a judgment. And Jill was there. Arms folded. Jaw clenched. eyes hard. There's a mismatch on your ID, Jill said. There wasn't. Naomi knew it. Jill probably knew it. But that wasn't the point. The point was power. Who has the right to challenge whom? Who gets the benefit of the doubt, and who gets the full weight of the doubt dropped on their shoulders like a bag of bricks? Let me speak plain now. This is what racism looks like after it puts on a tie. It doesn't spit at you. It doesn't shout. It smiles. It says, I'm just doing my job. It says, I had a feeling. It says, better safe than sorry. And beneath all that, it whispers, you don't belong here. Naomi handed over her ID again. The man next to Jill, Greg, he said his name was, reviewed it. He saw nothing wrong. But Jill wouldn't let go. She was belligerent at the counter, Jill said. A lie, but a familiar one. Because when Black women assert themselves, they are often called aggressive. When they speak firmly, they are called threatening. When they don't shrink, they are called dangerous. You people always. Jill stopped herself. But the poison had already left her mouth. Greg's face changed. His gaze flickered, not with anger, but with clarity. He saw it now. The truth behind the mismatch. The real issue that no system had flagged, but lived in Jill's heart the whole time. He made the call. The reservation was valid. The ID matched. There was no reason, none at all, to deny Naomi the right to fly. You're free to reboard, Greg said. Jill turned away, defeated but still defiant. Naomi turned back toward the plane. And as she walked, her feet light but her chest heavy, she thought. How many others never make it back onto that plane? How many others lack the badge, the rank, the training? And more than that, why should they need it? Back in her seat, she felt the eyes again. Some curious, some judgmental, some pretending not to see. And yet, there she sat, same seat, same mission. But something had shifted. Because what nearly derailed her wasn't a bomb, wasn't a suspect, wasn't a system failure. It was a woman with power, and a prejudice she didn't think she had to hide. This is the third door. It is not physical. It is psychological. It opens when your legitimacy is questioned not because of anything you've done, but because of who you are, who they think you are. And walking through it leaves a scar you cannot see, but you will feel it every time you sit down, stand up, or speak. The plane took off with a gentle lurch. Wheels curled into metal, the belly of the aircraft swallowing gravity. And for a moment, there was silence. Naomi leaned back in her seat. Not out of comfort, out of calculation. She had made it through the gate, past the line, back into her seat. But what does it mean in this country to make it through? Is survival the goal? Or merely a delay before the next test? Because for the Black soul in America, even altitude doesn't grant escape. The seatbelt sign dimmed. Passengers shuffled. A mother unwrapped goldfish for her child. A businessman resumed typing. Someone sneezed. A polite chorus of bless you. Life resumed its quiet hum. But Naomi's senses remained alert. She wasn't just flying, she was watching. Silver Hawk, her target, sat near the back. Hoodie, ball cap, lean. Face partially obscured. Energy coiled like a spring. She marked his seat. 20E. The mission intact. And yet, just as she began to map her strategy, the turbulence hit. At first, it was light. A gentle sway, like a rocking cradle. But it grew, subtle to sudden. The plane jolted. Overhead bins rattled. Passengers clutched armrests, looked toward the flight attendants for cues. Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some minor turbulence, the captain's voice said. Please return to your seats and fasten seatbelts. Naomi complied. But not everyone did. Because here she came again, Jill. Striding down the aisle. Phone in hand. Eyes locked, not on passengers, not on turbulence, but on Naomi. Jill stopped beside her row. Stared down with a tight jaw. Come with me, she said. Naomi blacked. The seatbelt sign is on. I said come with me, Jill snapped. Louder. Voices nearby hushed. Rose turned. The air changed. This was no longer about protocol. This was theater. And Jill had chosen her villain. Naomi stayed calm. Years of training held her spine in place. Ma'am, a flight attendant said softly, please take your seat. We'll address any concerns after the turbulence. She's a security risk, Jill barked. I need her in the galley now. There it was. The phrase. Weaponized not by fact, but by familiarity. Because in post, 9/11 America. In the mind of many. The words security risk don't have to be proven. They only have to be said. By the right person. About the right person. Who looks the wrong way. And Naomi, composed, black, female, fit the picture. The phrase lingered. Passengers grew tense. One man muttered, what's going on? Another clutched her handbag tighter. Fear does not need evidence. Only suggestion. Naomi glanced toward her suspect in 20E. He was watching now. Eyes sharp. Body still. She felt it. The sting of exposure. And here was the choice again. Bow down to a lie. Or rise up and risk it all. She looked at Jill. Looked at the flight attendant. Then back at the trembling sign above. Seat belt on. I'll go, Naomi said softly. As soon as it's safe. Jill fumed. But the turbulence, perhaps fate's protection, kept her at bay. She sat 2 rows behind. Watching. Burning. 10 minutes passed. The plane steadied. The sign blinked off. Jill stood immediately. Now, she said. And Naomi followed. Not because she had to, but because she was done letting this woman define her narrative. They reached the galley, tucked behind rattling carts and humming vents. And there, amid the metal and plastic and silence, Jill cornered her. I spoke with security, Jill said. They said something's off about you. I want the truth. Naomi stared. This woman wasn't gatekeeping anymore. She was hunting, not for truth, but for confirmation of her own fear. Let me stop here, dear reader. Let us sit in this. Because this is where racism lives now. Not in burning crosses or separate fountains, but in the gut feeling that a black woman with power must be hiding something. That her calm is a disguise. That her excellence is too good to be true. This is how suspicion becomes policy. How fear becomes procedure. How racism becomes reasonable. Naomi breathed. Deep. Slow. She had tried discretion. She had chosen peace. But now the mission, her very country's safety, was at stake. And so, she did what few people ever do at 35,000 feet. She reached into her jacket, pulled out her leather wallet, and revealed her badge. Homeland Security. Not a metaphor. Not a guess. Fact. Jill paled. Her mouth opened. But no words came. She looked at the badge. Then at Naomi. Then down. You're undercover, she whispered. Naomi nodded once. And you nearly compromised a federal operation, she said. Because you couldn't believe someone like me could hold power without hiding something. But, you're black, Jill mumbled. And there it was. Not shouted. Not slurred. Murmured. But no less lethal. Naomi's voice dropped to a whisper. Sharper than any scream. Yes. And you should ask yourself why that made me suspicious of you. Ask yourself what you expected. From someone like me. The silence in the galley was absolute. Even the hum of the plane seemed to fade. And in that stillness, Jill's certainty broke. Not with rage, but with the slow flood of shame. Naomi turned. She didn't need Jill's apology. She didn't need her understanding. She had a job to do. And a man 3 rows back, hiding under a baseball cap, was about to discover what it means. When the most underestimated person on the plane is the most dangerous one on board. The badge gleamed under the sterile light of the galley. Leather worn at the edges. Gold seal pressed firm with legitimacy. Not just a card. Not just a title. Proof. Proof that Naomi Johnson, This black woman, this so-called security risk, was, in truth, the very reason the passengers on that plane could sleep at night. Jill started. Her lips parted, her posture broke. The face of a woman who had stepped into a fire she thought she had set for someone else. Naomi said nothing for a long moment. She let the weight of it settle in Jill's chest like a stone in a shallow bowl. Then, in a voice that did not seek permission or understanding, she said, "You have jeopardized a federal investigation. You've profiled a citizen doing her job. You've endangered every life on this aircraft because you couldn't imagine someone like me having the power to protect you." And Jill, her arrogance leaking through the cracks, mumbled, "I was trying to protect the passengers. You didn't look like someone from Homeland Security." There it was. The naked truth. Not draped in flags. Not hidden behind policy. But plain. You didn't look the part. Now I ask you, reader, those of you who remember the 1950s and 60s, who watched a young black child walk into a school escorted by National Guard? Who saw black soldiers return from Vietnam to face segregation at home? How many times has "you don't look the part" cost someone their dignity? How many jobs, promotions, appointments, and safe passages have been denied because someone decided what trustworthy looked like? Because someone decided, what does American look like? Naomi took a breath. This was not the moment to teach, not the moment to reform Jill's soul. That work, if it would ever happen, was hers to do. Naomi had more urgent business. A suspect in 20E. A man trafficking identities like playing cards, slipping through cities, building a web of deception from the faces of the innocent. He was 3 rows back. And the moment he sensed something was wrong, he'd vanish again. Naomi returned to her seat, passing down the aisle as eyes followed her like whispers. She felt them, not with pride, not with shame, but with clarity. People saw her now, but they did not know what to do with what they saw. Some looked away. Some looked longer. Some looked confused, as though something didn't add up in the equation they'd carried their whole lives. Black plus power equals? And when the answer was agent, protector, authority, their arithmetic failed. She sat, calm, poised, reassembled, and began to watch. 20E. The suspect stirred, tapped on his phone. He wore the same stillness Naomi had worn moments before, but hers had been disciplined. He was calculating. He looked forward, directly at her. A flicker in the eye. Recognition? Suspicion? Naomi adjusted her seatbelt, leaned back, did not break eye contact. Not now. Not yet. Moments later, a flight attendant passed, glancing toward Naomi with quiet respect. A small nod. Perhaps she had heard. Perhaps she had only guessed. But the energy had shifted. Naomi no longer moved through the plane as a passenger. She moved as a presence. And presence, when possessed by the wrong person, is dangerous. But Naomi knew something Jill never would. Real power does not need permission. Then came the message. Her phone buzzer. A coded text. Suspect confirmed. DHS team standing by at O'Hare. 20E. Maintain visual. Do not engage. She slid the phone away. Eyes steady. 3 rows back, Silverhawk adjusted his hoodie. Sipped a soda. Looked calm. But Naomi was calm. She had seen it in war zones and back alleys. She knew when it was real and when it was loaded. The plane began its descent. The overhead lights blinked. Tray tables locked. And Jill, somewhere in the cabin, subdued now, did not make another move. She had been shown who Naomi was. Not with anger. Not with protest. But with fact. And fact is the one thing prejudice cannot bend forever. Let us pause again. Because I want to say something to you, my elders. You were told that one day, when enough time had passed, this fight would end. But time alone is no cure. Only truth is. And truth, sometimes, must come with a badge. Sometimes with a lawsuit. Sometimes with nothing more than a black woman saying, I am here. I am prepared. I am not yours to diminish. Naomi sat in 14C, composed. The mission was still on. The plane touched down. The suspect would be intercepted. But something else had landed too. Not just justice. Not just law. Dignity. And in a world that daily robs Black women of that gift, Naomi had carried hers like armor. Not loud. Not angry. But unshakable. The wheels touched down with a sigh. A long, aching sigh. As if the plane itself was tired of what it carried. Not just in bodies, but in stories. Chicago. Cold sky, long gates, and a terminal filled with people who had no idea that justice had just barely stayed on board. Naomi stayed seated. She always did. Veterans of missions do not rush. She let the suspect, seat 20E, Silver Hawk, gather his things. Let him stretch. Let him move. He thought he was free. He had no idea that this time, his pursuer wore heels and a Homeland Security badge hidden behind silence. People jostled. The usual dance of coats, bags, goodbyes. Naomi stood, collected her bag. She followed, not too close, not too far, out of the jet bridge, into the wide corridor of O'Hare International. She moved like a shadow. Silver Hawk walked toward baggage claim, casual, phone in hand, hood up. But Naomi wasn't watching for motion. She was watching for nerves. For that moment when someone who's run long enough senses the wall ahead. Then her phone buzzed again. We see him. Wait by Starbucks. She peeled away, veering left. Starbucks always made for good cover. Noise. Movement. No questions. 2 plainclothes agents were waiting. Coffee cups in hand, badges hidden in sleeves. They didn't nod. They didn't speak. They just moved. The arrest was clean. 3 steps. 1 flash of a badge. 1 command. Federal agents. Hands where we can see them. Silver Hawk frozen. Then bolted. 2 seconds later, he was on the ground. Arms twisted. Backpack spilled. A small crowd gasped. Phones raised. Someone started filming. And Naomi stood still, watching the pieces fall where they belonged. Then came Jill, trailing behind a Global Skies supervisor, eyes red, face pale. The woman who had nearly unraveled a federal mission. Not because of incompetence, but because of a prejudice she mistook for professionalism. She stepped forward, as if to apologize. Miss Johnson, I didn't realize. Naomi held up a hand. You saw what happened. That should be enough. Jill's mouth trembled. The supervisor cleared his throat, his voice polished. On behalf of the airline, we deeply regret the situation. We'll be conducting an internal review. We'd also like to offer compensation for the inconvenience. Naomi didn't blink. Your airline can contact my department. She turned away. Not out of spite, not out of anger, but because some apologies aren't owed forgiveness. They're owed reflection. Now listen to me, reader. You who have watched decades unfold, wars, protests, assassinations, inaugurations. You know, as I do, that when racism is exposed, it rarely apologizes with its whole chest. It mumbles. It deflects. It offers free tickets. But what Naomi wanted could not be booked on a return flight. She wanted a system that believed her the first time. She wanted a country where a Black woman didn't need to flash a badge to be believed. That evening, Naomi sat in a government office downtown, finalizing her report. Her supervisor, Marshall, glanced at her notes. Clean work, he said. Suspects already being processed. DHS is getting credit. And, word from Global Skies, they're launching an investigation into your friend Jill. Naomi nodded. No triumph. Just closure. She didn't want revenge. She wanted a record. Because if stories like hers are not written down, they are erased. 2 days later, the internet caught fire. Someone had filmed the confrontation, the forced removal, the boarding, The arrest. Someone captioned it. She tried to stop a black woman from flying. Turns out the black woman was Homeland Security. And suddenly, a country that too often looks away. Had to watch. The story spread. Debates erupted. And for one brief, blazing moment, the world saw what Naomi had always known. That dignity is not granted. It is defended. Let me say this plainly. Naomi didn't win because she had a badge. She won because she refused to disappear. And isn't that the story of so many in this country? Black nurses, black lawyers, black janitors, black mothers, all doing their jobs, all being second-guessed. Until one day, one of them says, "You will not erase me today." And the world has no choice but to listen. Naomi sat alone in a jazz lounge on the north side of Chicago. The lights were low. The band played Coltrane, soft and aching. And she nursed sparkling water as if it were wine. She should have been celebrating. The mission was complete. The suspect was in custody. The department was pleased. But no medal gleamed on her chest. No headline praised her calm under fire. Because Naomi was not just an agent. She was a mirror. And America does not like looking into mirrors. She had read the headlines. Airline employee suspended after incident with federal agent. Racial profiling allegations spark public outcry. Passenger turns out to be DHS undercover. But headlines are easy. They cost nothing. They're America's favorite way to say, "We saw it. Let's move on." But Naomi? She was still living it. You see, my dear reader, what happens after the cameras are put away is what tells you who we really are. The phone calls, the internal memos, the quiet, behind-the-scenes moves designed to protect power. Naomi's supervisors were proud of her, but none of them asked how it felt. To be humiliated in front of 150 passengers by someone who called her security risk, with no proof, other than the color of her confidence. In the weeks that followed, Jill was suspended. Global Skies issued an apology thin as tissue. A corporate statement posted online. "We value diversity and do not tolerate discrimination in any form." 1,000 likes. 1,000 shrugs. And just like that, the system did what it always does. It made a spectacle out of harm, then moved on like nothing ever happened. Naomi, though, did not move on. She returned to work. Field reports. Sat in briefings. But something in her had shifted. Not broken. Not bent. Sharpened. One afternoon, she stood at the back of a room filled with young agents in training. They were discussing field protocol. Someone raised their hand. "What's the best way to deal with an airport escalation?" Naomi stepped forward. She said only this: "Do your job well enough that they can't say it was your fault. And know that, sometimes, they'll say it anyway." A silence fell. Not of confusion, but of understanding. Because they knew. Some of them had lived it too. Let me pause here. Because perhaps you, dear reader, remember a time when black women weren't allowed to fly at all, or teach, or vote, or lead. And now here one stood, the protector of the people who questioned her presence. This is the contradiction that has defined our nation. That black women have always been asked to clean up the fire, and then apologize for the smoke. Naomi didn't want Jill fired. She didn't want revenge. She wanted reckoning. But America doesn't do reckoning well. It does silence. It does deflection. It does, let's not make this political. And so, the story began to fade. The hashtags slowed. The outrage cooled. As it always does, until the next Naomi is forced to remind us. I am not your enemy. I am your protector. And still, you cannot see me without fear. At night, Naomi walked the Chicago streets. She passed black girls with braids and wide eyes. She passed white women clutching purses. She passed young men blasting Kendrick from car windows. Life moved on, but she moved with the knowledge that every step she took was one her ancestors never could. And still, not one of those steps was promised. She returned to her apartment, sat by the window, wrote the final line of her field report. It read, "Target apprehended. Alias intact. Mission compromised briefly by internal civilian interference. No action required against civilians unless deemed necessary by the department." She paused, then added, "Recommend internal review of implicit bias training in transportation staff interfacing with high-security passengers." It was a small line, a quiet ripple. Still, she wrote it, because dignity, like justice, must be recorded. So I ask you now, my friend, as someone who's lived long enough to know the smell of history when it repeats, how many Naomis do we miss? Because we never ask who she really is? How many agents, nurses, teachers, mothers, pastors do we label angry or aggressive because they dare to speak clearly while Black? Naomi walked through the fire and didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. Her presence alone was a revolution. The struggle is what happens after, when no one is looking, when the camera is off, when the nation shrugs. The news cycle had moved on. A hurricane in the Gulf, a political scandal, another celebrity meltdown, and the video of Naomi being escorted off a plane, only to later help arrest a federal target, was now buried under layers of otherness. The internet had done what it does best, burned brightly, then gone cold. But Naomi? She was still here, still showing up, still filing reports, still boarding flights with an alias stitched into every corner of her being. Because this was never about going viral. It was about staying visible, in a country that still doesn't know how to see her. One morning, she walked through another airport. Same suit, same badge hidden, same calm that people mistake for silence. And the gate agent smiled. Not Jill, this one was younger, polite, respectful. Her name tag read Layla. Layla didn't flinch at Naomi's ID. She didn't pause. She didn't squint. She simply nodded and said, "Safe travels." And for a moment, Naomi wondered, is this progress? Or just a good day? Because every Black American knows, there's no such thing as autopilot when it comes to dignity. She boarded, sat in her usual aisle seat, watched people drift down the cabin like pages in a book she'd read too many times. A child smiled at her. A businessman ignored her. A white woman gave her that awkward nod, the one that says, "I saw the video. I'm not like them." Naomi smiled back, not because she needed their recognition, but because her grace was not dependent on their guilt. Let me pause now, because this is where America likes to end the story. She stood tall. She proved them wrong. The system was corrected. The future is better. But no, my friend, that is not the truth. The truth is, Naomi still walks into rooms where her credentials are doubted, still steps onto planes wondering if someone will question her right to be there, still has to speak calmly when she wants to shout. Because the badge may prove her job, but it does not protect her skin. And yet, she continues, because to be a Black woman in America, and to do the work of protecting the very people who doubt you, is to carry both the fire and the water. It is to live in contradiction, without losing your conviction. Weeks later, she received a letter, typed, official, from the Department of Transportation, an acknowledgement of her experience, an internal review completed, a quiet admission that bias played a role, no grand apology, no sweeping reform, just enough to be archived. She read it once, then folded it, slipped it into a drawer, alongside her badge, her journal, a photo of her grandmother, smiling in front of the house she wasn't allowed to buy in 1954. Naomi looked at that picture for a long time. They told her she didn't belong, she whispered. And she still made space. That night, Naomi stood in her living room. Music playing low, Billie Holiday, slow and stormy. She stared out the window. In a country she both loved and feared. a country she had sworn to protect, even when it didn't protect her back. And in that silence, she did not break. She did not soften. She decided, I am not waiting for permission to belong. I belong because I exist. Because I protect even those who would never protect me. So now I leave you, reader. You who have walked through time. Who remember the dogs in Birmingham. The marches in Selma. The silence after King was shot. You know what this is. This is not a new story. Only a new name. Naomi Johnson. Agent. Citizen. Black woman. And when she stands for all the ones who sat in the back of the bus. So that one day, she could fly. Even if she had to fight for the right to stay seated. This is the end of her story. But it is not the end of the work. The work is yours now. To speak. To correct. To remember. Because America forgets too easily. But Naomi doesn't. And neither should you.